Okay everybody, I'm going to do another game analysis, a game I played at US Amateur Team North, this time with the black pieces. And as we'll see right here, my opponent played the Linde system. So already I have a setup that I intend to play. That's going to involve knight coming to f6, e6, c5, bishop d6, knight c6, b6, and I'll show that as we go through the game. Here I want to make a point that I'm very particular about the move order in which I reach my desired setup, because I'm trying to avoid as many deviations from the main lines here as possible. So I start with knight f6. I find this to be superior move order than c5, because then I'd have to contend with the reverse Alvin counter gambit, and I know that this can be sharp and tricky, so I'm going to just take away that possibility by starting with knight f6 after e3. Then I play e6. Now c5 is the main move here. As you can see by these arrows I have, the idea would be for active play with knight c6, queen b6, and that's a totally fine way of playing. In fact, I'd encourage you to play that way. It's one of the best ways to meet the Linde system. I just already have a different setup that I've prepared and have in mind, so I just don't want the extra option for white here to take on c5, where I'd have to recoup the pawn and deal with some complications. Not critical for black is this move d takes c5. I just don't want to have to, I just want to avoid extra work, I should say. So I just play e6, knight d2, now I can play c5 confidently, c3, and bishop to d6. So something you'll notice in the next few moves here is that I'm going to hold off on moving my knight to c6 until they commit their bishop to d3. And it will look like after bishop g3, castles, knight g to f3. So if I played knight to c6 here, I'd have to also contend with the bishop to b5 line, which I play myself and find a little annoying for black, because you have to have a completely different strategy in mind, just due to the fact that after knight e7, bishop d3, this knight on e7 inhibits two of the main plans that black can adopt, one with b6 and one with queen e7 or rook e8. Queen e7, rook e8 intending for the e5 break to equalize, and b6 isn't as effective here because now e4 is pretty strong. It's not like it's crushing for white or anything, but it's a completely different scenario due to the openness of this diagonal and the fact that our bishop can't retreat to this square to avoid the forking potential. So it forces us to open up the center when our pieces are a little awkwardly placed. So it's just a completely different way of playing, and I want to avoid that if possible. So I do so by starting with b6, so that after bishop to d3, I can go knight c6. Now I've transposed into what I would have anyways. If they'd started with bishop d3 after knight c6, then I would have played b6 in this position. So I felt like I was had a nice sneaky move order to get what I wanted and avoid any potential preparation by my opponent. And then here we'll see that my opponent played the first I'd call surprise move with queen e2. Queen e2 is unusual. It's a waiting strategy that my opponent was adopting to bring the rook to d1 and hopefully maximize any sort of attacking potential or central breaks, holding off on the castling. So I'd never want to take on g3 here and open up that h-file for the rook. That would definitely not be in my favor. It should be noted that here probably the main move is knight e5. Also, to show that e4, the huge difference by my knight not being on e7 is that bishop e7 is a really nice retreat move here to deal with the threats in the center. e5 isn't so strong because of knight h5. I have these arrows here to show that I'll take on g3, but only once white has castled and that I don't have any threats on the h-file. If you move like queen c2, you just play h6. Black is fine. So jumping back too far. Alright, at knight e5, my intended plan here is that I want to jump in with bishop to b7, and then after a move like f4, which is the most aggressive way to play, you have this really nice reroute. You can see my triangle arrows here. Knight e7, coming to f5, bishop will come to e7, knight will come to d6, and I'll gain control of the e4 square in this reversed stonewall kind of setup. So just to show what that would look like, after queen f3, knight f5, maybe bishop f2 intending g4, then I have, just in time, bishop e7, g4, knight d6, g5, knight f to e4, and I'd be really content to play this middle game. I could then look to do some sort of expansion on the queen side, and it's hard for white to get any sort of attack rolling here. The pawns are a little clumsy, and I have good control over these squares. So that was my plan. That's how I wanted to play. Should be noted that here, since I intend to come tonight to f5, there is an interesting move here, queen b1, which would hold me back from doing it, but you can just play g6, and let's say bishop f2, intending to meet knight to f5 with g4. I think king g7 is an interesting move, adding protection to the g-pawn, because after like castles, I can just start with h5 and then play knight f5 and still get my intended play. So you can see king g7 was important to protecting any sort of sacrifices on the g6 square. So I was ready to play this way, but my opponent was ready to play with queen e2. So get rid of those arrows. Bishop b7. I was still expecting like knight e5 or castles, but then rook d1 came, and so this was the second surprise. So here I fully understood that my opponent was waiting, and I found this really annoying because if I were to play knight e7, you can notice that things have changed a little. With the rook opposing my queen, e4. I was calculating these variations, but I was running into trouble. After, let's say, d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight takes, bishop takes, bishop takes. There's this really nice in-between move that was giving me headaches. There's just nothing really I can do, because at this point I'd just lose the pawn, and that'd be a nice way to lose the game. Now, upon further analysis, I did, after the game I should say, I did realize that it is possible to play bishop takes e4, which is a little counterintuitive, but it doesn't matter because everything's trading anyway, so we're not really giving up a bishop for a knight. And then here it's different because they don't have this in-between move when we have knight takes g3. So that was something I overlooked, and maybe I could have played for knight e7. That was still not leading to anything for black, at most equality. So what ended up happening was I had to go for the secondary plan of pushing for e5, and I played with queen e7, which ended up putting me in a position that I wasn't ready to play, and I made some bad strategic decisions, so I had real trouble here in a few moves. I think if I had this position again, though, I would simply play h6, useful waiting move. If white's waiting, we'll also wait. And yeah, here e4 isn't as strong because we can just play bishop takes g3. And now that we have our pawn on h6, we can take on d4 and not worry about any sort of in-between e5 move that distracts our protection of h7. So h6 was a really nice waiting move that would have taken care of the problems I was foreseeing with e4, but I missed that, which is why I chose a move that got my queen off of the what would soon be opened file. But after knight e5, knight e7, it should be noted that in similar positions there's this really nice sequence that goes something like this, where white might have a sacrifice on h7 with the intention of queen h4, or queen h5 rather, knight e4. Doesn't work here though because our queen is protected on the square. So here we could grab the knight. But in other positions where we don't play b6 and bishop b7 and go for queen e7 right away, this is actually can be kind of challenging. In fact, I can go back and show that really quickly, because there's a nice stem game. Let's go with knight c6, bishop to d3, queen e7, knight e5, knight d7 here. It's really important that you have to take back with the queen. In the game Kamsky, one of the probably considered the king of the London system, played it for many years at the highest level, and really wrote a lot of the theory, so to speak. Crushed Shankland in this game with this novelty bishop sacrifice. Just an amazing tactic where knight's coming into g5 and you can't take it because your queen is on the other side of your pawn here. So after the move here, we would like to be able to play g6 as a counter-attacking measure, but the problem is our bishop is on d7, and black is going to regain the piece with some interest here, which is why you'll notice in the position all this time ago, taking the queen on d7 is more accurate, where now queen check, knight here, we can play g6 because our bishop is on c8 and not on d7, and taking the queen isn't good. The other problem though with going into this line is that there's a forced perpetual here. After knight f6, say king g7, your king has to come to either h7 or g8, because if you come here you're actually just going to get mated on h6 and g7. So I didn't want to play this kind of variation where the only way I really know how to play against knight e5 involves a potential perpetual check. So that's why I chose the b6 lines. So jumping back into the game, this was not the move. My notation got out of whack there. Don't mind that. After queen e7, we don't have knight e5, knight d7. We don't have similar tactics, as I said, because the queen on c5 would be protected. So here my opponent played f4. Very reasonable move. And this is where I think I started to kind of think too abstractly. Well, first of all, f6 would have been a decent move. For some reason in my calculations I was having trouble responding to queen h5, although just g6 is good enough here. Or even just playing f5 at this juncture would be good enough. So I should have strongly considered that. I played f5 right away. Also a decent move. I mean, the position's very locked and equal, so nothing really to be afraid of. Here, just knight to f3, but I wanted to come up with some sort of strategy here, placement for my pieces, and I had this grand idea that if I could swap twice on e5, bishop takes, knight takes, knight takes, pawn takes, then we'd be left with this piece imbalance where I could aim to trade off my light squared bishop and get some sort of good knight versus bad bishop situation. So that was the general idea. I think even if I could accomplish that, it would still be very tricky because this bishop isn't entirely terrible. Having already found a way outside of the pawn chain. So this was a little too abstract. And also, I just overlooked the simple notion that white could take back with the pawn and maintain some pieces on the board while they had this nice space advantage. So already I was having some oversights that didn't bode well. I'm making it sound really ominous. Just a disclaimer here, I ended up losing this game pretty poorly. I played a5. a4. I expected this move. This is actually quite common for similar ideas when you play against the Stonewall Dutch, where a bishop a6 move will be met with bishop, in this case, to b5. So if an exchange occurs, the pawn can come back and continue to cramp down on any sort of queenside space or counterplay. Knight b to d8. I'm just aiming for bishop to a6, but I got into real trouble after h4, and I kind of played h5 without any serious thought. All I thought here was like, oh, putting a pawn on the dark square, I'll just lock it on that square. And that's, I think that I consider this a very, I would almost call it like beginner mistake on my part, because my eyes were soon opened after bishop f4, queen e8, just to have an eye on these squares, while, like if I were to play bishop a6 and bishop b5 and take, I could move my knight then with tempo on the pawn, and then after rook h3, yeah, now my eyes were opened. I felt like I'd made a huge mistake, which in fact I had. This position is already very, very good for white, and my king is going to be in some immediate danger here. Stuck to my guns and played bishop to a6, but after bishop to b5, bishop takes b5 is another blunder, I'd say. Blunder or mistake. At this point, I'm pretty much losing, because after a takes b5, I don't have a good square for my knight. I ended up playing knight e7 kind of hastily because I wasn't satisfied with my original intention of knight a7, c4. So I just kind of played knight e7 like, okay, now on c4, I'll have some protection on d5, and I might be able to take on d4 in between. And then my opponent just played the very simple knight g5, and I felt like I had made the situation even worse, which is true. So this has already become quite a poor game from what I thought was going to be a promising, easy middle game plan. I am just simply busted after c4. There's no way to sugarcoat it. I don't have any defense. I played g6 out of desperation, but c takes d5. Yeah. I lack words to describe how bad this feels. I played on for a few moves, but yeah, at this point I'm just resigned. Already I think the computer evaluates this as +10 or something, which I totally agree with, because I'd have to give up serious material just to avoid the mating threats that occur, notwithstanding the knight c7 threat. So I think the takeaways from this game are, if your opponent plays something that you're not familiar with, and especially if it's a waiting strategy, just see what measures you can take to not get off track from your intended strategy yourself. If I had that kind of mode of thinking, I think I might have come across this simple move h6 that didn't take me out of my comfort zone, and also just about being abstract with your thinking. Having general knowledge of peace imbalances is good, but always check that it works in any specific position. Here I got myself into trouble because I kind of made what I thought were generally good ideas in a wrong situation. So those are takeaways from the game. I hope you learned something about I guess tournament play, or let's just say the Linde system in general, and can apply it to your own games.